You know about Abdullah. You know he was the man who taught me the Hebrew scriptures as psychological drama, who spent 5 years showing me that the Bible is not history, but instruction, not a record of what happened, but a map of what consciousness does, who told me I was in Barbados and shut the door. What I have spoken about less, what I have carried in my reading and my thinking for 30 years, and what is in every lecture I ever gave, whether I named it or not, is another source. Not a teacher in the biographical sense, not a man I studied with in a room, a man who died in 1827 in relative obscurity in a London house, singing hymns with his wife Catherine by his side. His name was William Blake. I know what that does to the image you are forming. A poet, an artist, an 18th century eccentric who saw angels in trees and painted mythological figures with impossible anatomies. Stay with that image for a moment, because what I am about to show you is why that image is incomplete, and why the complete one changes something about every teaching you thought you already understood. Blake was not a mystic in the way that word is usually understood. He was not soft, he was not vague, he was not producing images for their own sake. He was a diagnostician. He saw something about human consciousness, about the relationship between the inner world and the outer world, between imagination and what appears, and he spent his entire life finding precise ways to say it. The paintings, the illuminated books, the mythology he built from scratch because the existing mythologies were not accurate enough for what he needed to describe. Most people who encounter Blake encounter the surfaces, the tigers, the songs, the famous lines, and they file it under art. They are not wrong that it is art. They are wrong that art is what it primarily is. What it primarily is a report, a careful, exact, fully committed report from someone who had learned to see correctly and who could not stop describing what he saw. He saw visions from childhood, not as metaphor, as direct experience. He reported them the way a scientist reports an observation, matter-of-factly, precisely, without apology and without inflation. That quality, the refusal to either dramatize or dismiss what he was seeing, is what I recognized when I first encountered his work deeply. He was describing the same thing I was teaching, and in some formulations he was saying it better than I had. There is a line from Jerusalem, one of his prophetic books, that I have returned to more times than I can count. He put it this way: "In your own bosom you bear your heaven and earth, and all you behold. Though it appears without, it is within, in your imagination, of which this world of mortality is but a shadow." That is not a metaphor. That is a precise statement of the law. Everything you behold, the bank account, the relationship, the body, the circumstances, the gap between what is and what is desired, appears without. It presents itself as external, as independent of you, as the evidence against which you must measure your inner assumption and find it wanting or confirm it as warranted. Blake understood that this appearance is the central deception. What appears without is always what is within, not sometimes, not mostly, always. The outer world, Blake called it the world of mortality, the shadow, is the inner world expressed. The imagination is the real and eternal. The outer world is the shadow it casts. This is what I taught for 30 years under the name the law of assumption. Blake taught it a century earlier under the name the divine imagination. We were describing the same mechanism. He arrived at it through the discipline of vision. I arrived at it through Abdullah and through the scriptures. We were standing in different rooms, looking at the same light. And this is not two mystics agreeing with each other, two independent witnesses arriving at the same precise description of a mechanism, from entirely different roots, in entirely different languages. It is confirmation, the kind of confirmation that has nothing to do with shared tradition or borrowed ideas. the kind that happens when two people, working independently, describe the same law because the law is actually there. But here is what most people miss when they encounter that passage. And if I do not address this precisely, the teaching will land as philosophy rather than as practice. The word Blake uses is imagination, and in his usage, as in mine, that word does not mean what it means in ordinary speech. In ordinary speech, imagination is the opposite of reality, the unreal faculty, the thing you use when you are not dealing with the facts. Blake was precise about this error. He would not accept it for a moment. The imagination is not the faculty of what is not. It is the ground of what is. Not a mental activity for picturing absences, the creative power that produces presence. Everything that exists in the outer world was first an imaginal act, not a hope, not a wish, but an assumption occupied as fact by some consciousness, somewhere in the sequence that produced it. The imagination is the real world. The outer world is its shadow. This reversal, exact, complete, not metaphorical, is the whole of the teaching, not a way of feeling better about difficult circumstances, a statement about the structure of reality. Consciousness is the cause, the outer world is the effect, and the instrument of causation is the imagination, the faculty of assumption, of inhabiting a state as present fact. Blake had seen this. He had seen it directly, and he spent his life trying to say it in ways that could not be ignored, could not be filed under pleasant sentiment, could not be received as anything other than a precise diagnosis of how the world actually works. I want to tell you one more thing about Blake before this introduction closes, because it is the thing that has made returning to his work valuable beyond simply confirming the teaching. He understood what the resistance looks like. He gave it a name. He built an entire mythology around it. He called it Urizen, a name that is itself precise, your reason, your horizon, the faculty that measures, calculates, and enforces the limited reading of reality, the voice that looks at the outer world and says, this is what is real, this is what is possible, this is the range of outcomes available to a person in your circumstances. Urizen is not evil in Blake's mythology. That is the important distinction. He is tragic. He believes he is serving order. He believes he is protecting you from the dangerous irrationality of believing something the evidence does not support. He weeps over what has gone wrong. He is your reason, doing its best in the only frame it knows, the frame of the outer world as primary, the inner world as secondary, the evidence as the final authority on what is possible. I know the question that raises. If Urizen is my own reason, how do I get past him? How do I stop the voice that measures and calculates from dismantling the assumption before it can harden into fact? You do not argue with Urizen. Argument is his territory. He will always win an argument about the evidence because the evidence is real. You simply move. You occupy the assumption and let Urizen observe what the outer world does next. That is Blake's instruction. It is also mine. And it has been mine for 30 years, whether I was speaking his name or not. What Blake understood, and what I have tried to say in different ways across every lecture I ever gave, is that Urizen is the wrong instrument for the job. Not because reason is wrong in general, because reason applied to the outer world, as though the outer world is the cause, produces only more of the outer world that is currently there. It confirms what is. It cannot produce what is not yet. Only imagination can do that. Only the assumption, occupied as present facts, in the face of the evidence, against the voice that measures and calculates, moves the outer world. Blake saw it first. He spent his life finding the exact words for what he saw. I spent my life showing people how to use it. We were working on the same thing.